I'm standing here today on the front porch of the Charles Hackley House, one of the finest Queen Anne houses to be found anywhere in North America, and an integral part of our local history. Over the next 3 episodes, we hope to show you how the County Museum is undertaking the restoration step by step of this magnificent home. It's the goal of the County Museum to bring it back to its splendor as it appeared in 1890 when Charles Hackley and his wife Julia were residents here. One of the most unique factors in working on this restoration project is not only do we have such a fine example of Victorian architecture in the Hackley house, but it's actually part of a compound. Charles Hackley built the house in conjunction with his best friend and business partner, Thomas Hume. And the house next door was that of Thomas Hume's. Together, directly behind both houses, is the barn that served for both households, where the horses were kept and feed was kept and their carriages and so on. We're in the process of restoring all 3 buildings to revive this unique Victorian compound. Over the next 3 episodes, we're going to take a look at how the museum has gathered the information to do the capital restoration, the history of the houses themselves, and then we're going to take a look at the exterior restoration and the interior restoration. So come along and join us as we take a look at our old house, the restoration of the Charles Hackley house. Welcome to episode 2 of our old house, the restoration of the Charles Hackley house in Muskegon, Michigan. Here in the spring of 1994, one of the most frequent questions that I get asked is, why is the restoration taking so long? Well, in order to answer that question, I think it's important that we take a look at the condition of the house when we began the project. Queen Anne architecture is noted for its various angles, designs, and gingerbread on the exterior of the house. However, all of these materials suffer the effects of water damage over a long period of time. Because of the history of the house and long periods of disrepair, water damage, and in some cases insect damage, has created numerous problems for us that have to be addressed before we can even begin restoration process. To give you an example, we're now standing in the front of the house and taking a look of woodwork that has not yet had any work done on it. And it's fairly typical of conditions that we find all over the exterior of the house. One of the unique factors of this house is all of this beautiful woodwork. But as I just explained, it suffered a lot of water damage over time and the effects of aging. We can see here that the decorative trim, in this case this hand railing, is beginning to open up because of loss of paint over the years. Water has gotten inside and the wood has begun to swell. Also, the wood has just aged, as wood will naturally do over time, and as it does, it opens up and allows even more water inside. When that happens, the wood will begin to rot and can become infested with different pests, such as termites, and in particular, here in the Heritage Village, we have a lot of problem with carpenter ants. When that happens, the wood rot and the pest infestation, the wood can become so rotted that it'll actually disappear or fall off. We have a missing piece right here. We can also see decorative trim down here in the lower part of this porch. These pieces are loose. They've been suffered the effects of weather, and each one of these items is going to have to be restored by hand in order to bring this house back to its splendor that it had when it was first built. Now, unfortunately, in the investigation of what's going to be needed to restore the exterior of this house, we find that it's not only the decorative trim that has suffered damage over the last 100 years, but also some of the structural elements. Here we can see the railing coming down that's supporting the front porch. And when we take a look inside here, I can reach right in and pull out a piece of the wood. This was originally a part of the wood that held the porch up. And as you can see, dry rot and other problems have caused it to deteriorate to the point where it literally crumbles in my hand. So when we begin the restoration of this section of the house, we're going to have to start by going all the way down to structural elements. We'll investigate those main timbers and see if they're structurally sound. If they're not, they'll have to be replaced. If they are, they'll be treated so that they can survive for another 100 years. And then we'll begin building back up. As a result, then, the last stage will actually be the restoration of the decorative trim. That will come long after we've addressed the structural elements inside. Most Victorian homes have a lot of decorative trim on them. One of the things that makes the Hackley house so unique is that this was all custom designed for this particular house. We can see here in an inset on this post a hand-carved pattern. This pattern is called lamb's tongue, and it was a favorite motif of carving in Victorian times. But this is a unique variation of it that we only find in this house. Now, one of the problems that we have in restoration is that our research has shown over time this house has received over 19 coats of paint. Layer after layer of paint has built up to the point where we begin to lose this unique detail. Now, in order to return the house to the splendor of 1890s, this paint is going to have to be removed and the wood will have to be conserved so that the sharpness of this unique hand carving will reappear to our visitors. Another important architectural detail of a Queen Anne style home are jutting angles that come out and create visual interest in the facade, the sides of the house. An example here is this window behind me. Now, in 5 places around the Hackley house, we find jutting angles or roofs that come out that have been covered in turn metal. This was another material that was used on the outside of the house. Not only wood was used, but turn metal as well. What we found in looking at the turn metal roofs is that over time they've become so deteriorated that the decision has been made we cannot save them. These are going to have to be replaced totally. We can see when we look at this one over this window that it is so pinholed and so full of rust that there's no restoration treatment that will make it watertight ever again. So we're going to be seeing in just a few moments how we strip off this turn metal and how we replicate what the original roof looked like. Having identified some of the structural problems we have with the Hackley house, it's now time to begin looking at how we're going about the restoration process. Now, the first thing that the County Museum did was to start at the very top. The first project that the museum worked on was to replace the roof, and we've replicated the wooden shingle roof. Now, with this good, solid, tight roof now, we now have a platform underneath we can work. Now, as we started at the top on the main roof, we also have to do that on the sides with the different porches and angles that we were talking about. We're standing up here on the porte cochere roof, or the coach door roof, and with me I have Mr. Ron Lofgren. Ron? Ron is our building manager here at the Hackley and Hume site. And besides having a wide variety of restoration skills, he's also got over 40 years in the sheet metal business. Ron, I see you're soldering up some seams here. Tell me a little bit about how all this roof is put together, this turn metal roof.
The turn metal sheets are 28 by 20, and they're all hemmed 3/8 opposite hems and locked together, pounded down, and soldered.
Well, from the looks of it, Ron, we've got a lot of small sheets here. You told us the size and the dimensions. These are the same size sheets as were originally used?
Yes, very same size sheets.
So it kind of looks like it's a gigantic jigsaw puzzle in order to put it all together. I'm assuming it's taken quite a bit of time to hand form each one of these sheets.
Each sheet has to be cut and hand formed and installed. And there's a pattern to the roof itself.
So you had to actually make up the pattern pieces as you've been working through.
Right. The pattern follows around all 4 sides.
Now, Ron, we've been talking about turn metal, and I have a piece of it here. Exactly what is turn metal?
Turn metal is 80% tin, 20% lead.
Now, is this a pretty soft metal to work with?
Yes, it's very, very soft.
And I see you're putting all your seams together by the soldering that we just described. Is it easy to solder?
Real easy to solder. We're using 50-50 solder. That is part lead, so it makes it real simple.
Okay. Well, Ron, I see here as this roof is coming together, there's an important architectural element here, this ribbing. And I see that you're applying that in the same way?
Right. That has to be soldered on solid so no moisture or rain will get underneath it and rust it.
Okay. Now, when we began to examine the roof, and we realized, as we pointed out, that the turn metal was going to have to be replaced, we also examined that decorative ribbing we just described. And as you can see here, this is an original piece. It's far too deteriorated to attempt to save it. So we realized we were going to have to fabricate new ribbing. The problem is, we didn't know how to do it. As a matter of fact, we contacted sheet metal companies all over the United States, and they couldn't give us an answer as to how it was originally made. The reason is that it's got two curves to it, one going this way to form the rib, and one going this way, or in some cases, an external radius. And there's no crimping in here. There's no place where the metal is dented or misformed. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to replicate these pieces. And Ron, working with a local firm, came up with the answer. Ron, tell us a little bit about that machine, this machine that you have right here in front of us.
This is a Pexto crimping machine, and we took the crimping dies off in it and had Limback sheet metal make up some dies the shape of our ribbing.
Now, these are the dies that you're talking about right here, and these were custom fabricated right here in Muskegon?
Right.
Okay. And then how does this machine work? What does it do for you?
Well, it's the only way we could figure to roll this. Put a piece in, turn the clamp down to hold it a little bit, and run the piece through. The way the radiuses are formed, you have to raise up on it for the one radius and push down for the opposite radius.
So by adding pressure, pushing and pulling, as well as tightening down here, you're able to make that shape that you want without any deforming of the metal.
Right.
Okay. We know that after we had designed the machine and Lindbach sheet metal had made up the dies for us, it took Ron a while to get the hang of it. It takes a certain master feel to put just the right amount of pressure on these thin pieces of metal to get them shaped in the correct formation. However, after a fairly short period of time, after just a few weeks of working on here, Ron's become a master at it and has been able to shape all the ribbing we need for the roof, and as you can see behind me, it's been applied. Well, Ron, I see now that we've got the turn metal base plates down, and we've got the ribbing up to the top. You've put on a cap here. What does this do?
That's a decorative finial top on there, which has the original ornaments on it.
From looking in the photographs, we know that this was originally missing, but from looking in the photographs, is that how you're going about replicating the decorative pieces?
Yes. Yeah.
I think you have an example here. Can you hold this up and show it for the folks? We see that this is a rather bizarre-looking flower that we know from the photographs fit right here on this front post and faced out towards Webster Street. Now, where did this come from, Ron?
I made this.
You made it up down in the shop?
Right.
And again, you based this fabrication on the measurements and the design that you were able to pick up on the photograph.
Right.
So now that this is fabricated, we've got the cap on place, we're ready to install that, and we're just about finished with this roof, aren't we?
Right.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be beautiful. It's when you get up here and look at this metalwork close, it's really an incredible job how all this puzzle is going together. And when we get the paint on it, it's going to be another unique architectural element of this magnificent house. Now, rather than just fixing up our old house, we're working on a museum quality restoration. And one of the goals in this project is to restore the house to its 1889, 1890s appearance when the Hackleys first moved in, but even as importantly is to repair the damage that was done to the house over time so that the house won't need a major capital restoration again for, let's hope, another 100 years. Now, in order to do that, we have to address the structural damage that we talked about at the opening of the show. An example is moving down to this footing. These are the footings that hold the posts that hold the porte-cochere porch. We're standing just about directly underneath the metal roof that we talked about just a moment ago. And what we did was to reset the footing underneath these porch supports. Over time, particularly in the winter, the ground will freeze and heave up. In the summer and in moisture, it will settle back down. And what we need to do is to make sure that these porch supports are not going to move. Hopefully we've done that with a new footing, and this will give us a good solid support for the work that we're doing up above on this porch. Another example of how we're addressing structural damage is directly behind this plate. When we began working on the sidewalls here that are underneath this porch, we found that the sill, that's the main beams that sit along top of the foundation, and actually the house rests upon the sill, were pretty heavily rotted out. And in this section, we had a lot of termite damage. So what we did was to jack up this back edge of the house about an inch, lift out the rotted portions of that sill plate, put in new lumber, and then settle the house back down on it. It was a big project, but now we have a good foundation on which the house sits that's going to last us another 100 years. One other example of how we're addressing the structural problems is up here in the roof of the porch itself. Directly overhead of me are the main beams upon which the roof sits upon. These are a type of header. Once again, when we started working up in this section, we found that they were very badly deteriorated. They were pretty rotted out. So we had to strip out the rotted lumber, the main timbers, and replace them so that structurally this whole section would be good and sound. There's no sense in doing just exterior decorative trim if the house is going to continue to settle and have structural problems. So now we've got a good sound foundation to return this original millwork to. Now, we've been talking about how we have to replace some of the timber, particularly structural elements. However, it's our goal in doing this restoration project to save as much original fabric as we possibly can. We're going to see how we're going through the process of restoring the original decorative trim in just a few moments. But I'd like to talk about this post for a second. Occasionally, there are elements of architectural importance that we deem not strong enough, the original elements are not strong enough to do the job that we want them to. An example is this post. As you can see, this post and its sister post sitting next to it are carrying the weight of this whole end of the porch. The originals were badly deteriorated, so we had to have a replica made. Because we're working here in Muskegon County with the support of the entire county through a countywide millage, it's our goal to find as many craftsmen as we can in the local area so that we keep those dollars here in our own community. And we've been very, very pleased at the quality of craftsmen we found right here in Muskegon County. As a result, what we've done here is we have been able to replicate this post using local craftsmen. This will give us a good sound structure on which to hold up this porch. At the same time, we've been able to retain the original architectural design and features of this important element. Now let's review what we've done so far. We've addressed the structural problems of this side porch, and as we saw up on top, we're putting on a good solid roof. We've got good supports and good porch supports for them to sit on. Now comes the fun part. We're now ready to start returning the architectural elements to this section that make the house so unique. We have been able to retain most of the original elements through a restoration process. Now, the way we've been working is our carpenter staff is on contract through the summer months. They'll come in and take care of the major elements that we've just described. In the fall, as they're getting ready to shut down due to bad weather, I'll have them come through and strip off all of the decorative elements in the area where we're going to be working in the next year. all of those architectural elements, those individual pieces of gingerbread, will go down into the shop where another crew will work on them during the months when the weather's too bad to be outside. Now, when the architectural elements are taken off of the house, they're brought here in the shop. We're now standing in the basement of the Hume house, which has been set up as our main conservation and restoration lab. When the items are brought in, they're in pretty rough shape. They show evidence of the wood rot that we described, and as we can see on this piece, we've got that over 19 coats of paint that we've been talking about. The very first thing that we'll do is to examine them and see if the wood itself is pretty sound. In this case, it is. We make the determination that this architectural element can be saved. And then we'll go about removing the paint. Depending upon the type of paint and the amount of paint that we have on here, we'll use a number of different techniques. Some of them are just power sanders in many cases. Occasionally we'll use chemical strippers. In other cases, just mechanically scraping them will take the paint down. But we've got to get that paint off to bring out the architectural detail. And as we can see here, we've got one of those porch spindles that we saw earlier. This piece has had all of the paint removed, and yet we can see a lot of nail holes, we can see a lot of the rot, and so on that has been talked about before. Now, in doing this work, we're running across a lot of different elements that we have to be careful with. For instance, of these 19 coats of paint on here, we know that many of those coats are going to be lead paint. And as a result, we have to be very careful to ensure that our craftsmen are well protected. As you can see with the poster up here, and if you look around the shop, we are complying with all of the OSHA regulations. Even though we're a museum operation, we're governed by the same rules and regulations for worker safety as you would find in any typical construction site. We do this not only to comply with the law, but more importantly, because we have some very talented craftsmen and we want to take very good care of them. Now, once the material has, the paint has been removed, and if necessary, we'll remove any rotted wood, then we begin the process of building the piece back up. And as we can see right over here, Jim is working with a material which we call marshmallow here in the shop. His trade name is Abatron. Jim is our summer conservation assistant, and he comes to us with a background in woodworking. And Jim, can you tell me a little bit about this Abatron marshmallow material that you're working with? What is it, and how do you start out working with it?
Actually, it's a two-part epoxy that we mix in equal parts with a solvent, and it turns out to be kind of a consistency, as you can see here, like putty. It dries very, very hard, very little shrinkage, and can be sanded in about 10 hours, just like wood. What it does is replace the rotted material in the wood, giving a structurally sound piece as good as the original wood.
And Jim, in working with this, I see we not only are replacing the rotted wood, but I'm assuming in the process of originally building the house and then taking it apart, there's probably also a lot of nail holes in here that you have to deal with.
And this Arbitron product does the job. I think it's fantastic.
Now, when this piece is finished, when you've got the Arbitron in and it's had its 10 hours to dry and has assumed about the same strength and solidity of the original wood, then what do you do with it? I see that you've got in the application here kind of an uneven process.
We sand it down, and then we can prime it. This piece right here has been filled, as you can see, and primed with this reddish prime coat. This is now ready to be replaced on the house and painted with the fancy colors that you see outside.
But now, Jim, this is an original piece of the house. This isn't a replica.
That's correct.
So we can see that we're able to achieve our objective of maintaining as much of the original fabric as we can. But at the same time, on this piece that Jim's been working on, we can see even these little hand-carved circles. I don't know if you can see them in the primer color, but when this is all painted up, these will come back to life and become an important architectural element of the exterior of the house. Now, just as the turned metal roof that we looked at earlier is a giant jigsaw puzzle. The whole project is a jigsaw puzzle. Down here in the shop, we deal with literally thousands of pieces of architectural elements. So as we move around, you'll see everything has a tag or some type of marking on it. Smaller pieces are put in bags like this and labeled. And this is so that at the end of the winter season, when we've got the elements finished and they're ready to go back on the porch, we can remember where they went. Occasionally, in working on the architectural elements and millwork of the house, we come across a piece that's either missing or is beyond restoration. In that case, we move from the shop up here to our millwork area. We're now in the barn sitting between the Hackley and Hume houses, and we're using this as our wood shop. Now, when we come across a piece that we're going to have to replicate, we'll take a section, if we can find one, we'll take a section of wood and send it off to a firm that creates on a laser computer system a custom-made set of knives for us. These are large knives that, when go in a circular head, become like a large router bit. But because the pieces that we often work on are so large they can't be worked in a router, we have a special machine here called a shaper. Now, when this is set up with the custom-made knives locked in the head, we can run large pieces of wood through here and create the millwork that we need. When this is painted up, this will blend in with the original pieces and be indistinguishable. Now, another example of how we sometimes have to create pieces out here in the shop are some examples that I have right over here. On the sidewall of a Queen Anne house, we find a variety of textures and patterns, and of course the Hackley house is a prime example of this. In some sections you have wooden siding, such as this. Again, sometimes we find wooden siding that's so bad it cannot be restored down in the shop, so we have to replicate it. However, there is no place in the United States, anywhere in the world actually, that is making white pine beveled siding in the lengths that we need. So we have created our own custom jig here on a bandsaw that allows us to cut this and individually fabricate it. Another example of sidewall texture that we have to recreate are the sidewall shingles. We get shingle material straight from the lumber yard, but then these have to be hand cut into the distinctive patterns and shapes that we find on the sidewalls. Having examined the work that's being done to restore the exterior of the house, we're now ready to move inside. As the work progresses on the outside walls and roof, we now have a good, dry, sound interior. In our next episode, we're going to move inside the house and take a look at the research again and how we're actually peeling back through the layers of time to uncover the decorative schemes on the walls, the floors, and the ceilings. And we're going to take a look at how we're restoring the grandeur of the inside of this house. We hope that you'll be able to join us for our next episode of Our Old House.